This is CNN Money Switzerland with your latest coronavirus news updates. I am Ana Maria Montero. Coming up on the program, securing recovery for Switzerland. The Swiss government and its central bank today announcing new measures to help the sharply slowing economy. Details coming up. Plus, could antibody testing be the key to getting the healthy back to work as soon as possible? And calculating the true cost of coronavirus shutdown in Switzerland. Avenir Suisse says it's just not that easy. But first, let's have a quick recap of the main news headlines in Switzerland this Wednesday. The Swiss National Bank has set up a refinancing facility to boost liquidity, which will be available from March the 26th. President Thomas Jordan said there is no upper limit on the amounts available under the facility, and drawdowns can be made at any time. Meanwhile, the Federal Council has launched a 20 billion Swiss franc emergency scheme under which companies can get state-backed interest-free loans of up to 500,000 Swiss francs through their banks. Asked about containment measures post-April 19th, Federal Councillor Uli Maurert said that, quote, if the situation does not improve, the Federal Council will extend the measures already taken beyond April the 19th. And the postponement of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics brings up many questions concerning the new dates in 2021, as well as the logistics of putting on this mega event. Matt Layton lays out some of the challenges ahead.
Thomas Bach, the president of the IOC, he hosted a teleconference in front of 400 journalists answering all the questions. No, he has no regrets about the way the situation has been handled by the IOC. No, he's not going to resign. They've set up a task force to look at the problems. This is IOC coordination committee with the local host to look at the 1,000 problems and situations they're going to go for. He's called Here We Go. He also talked about the complexities about having to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, one piece missing and it's all destroyed. The major challenges and debates are, when are you going to hold it? Again, they didn't close the door to perhaps next spring even, although most people think it's going to be next summer. It has to be before the end of the summer 2021. What about the venues? Well, there's quite a few temporary venues. Do you take them down? Do you keep them going? Do you need to rent the other venues of the 42 for the whole year? Accommodation for the athletes. 11,000 athletes are supposed to go in 5,000 apartments, which are supposed to be sold this year. What's going to happen there? And so many other problems coming up. He said, we don't have that many answers, but at least we know the games are going to be perpetuated. We're going to keep them going. And so watch this space. In Switzerland also, it's quite interesting because we have an effect on the GDP next year, or this year. Well, we have the COF, the Swiss Economic Institute. They published some figures of projections, high, low and medium level. If you look at the medium level, they say potential growth is going to be about 1.2% with the sports events. However, if you take the sports events out, and that's the Euro 2020, which brings in about 2.5 billion Swiss francs, and the Olympics could bring anywhere over 3 billion Swiss francs, we're looking at a growth rate of maybe 0.8%. So a huge effect on the economic impact of the world and of Switzerland.
Avenir Suisse, an economic and political think tank, has released details on the impact of the coronavirus shutdown on the economy here in Switzerland. To walk us through their findings, Jürg Müller, one of the authors of the report, joins me now via Skype, of course. Thank you, Jürg, for joining us. Okay, so you've been crunching some numbers, looking to put some figures really to these different shutdown scenarios and what this could cost Switzerland. What did you find?
Yeah, we looked at different shutdown scenarios. One, the current shutdown in Switzerland, then at the more comprehensive shutdown currently in place in Italy. And then we didn't look at a complete shutdown because that's just not possible. It's not feasible to switch off the economy completely because the economy is us all. And if you switch off completely, you would also switch off the healthcare system and food supply. Now, the two aforementioned shutdown regimes, in the one currently in place in Switzerland, we came up with an amount of 12 billion Swiss francs per month. And in the more comprehensive shutdown regime, the one in place in Italy, we came up with a number of 30 billion Swiss francs each month. If you add this up for the whole year, if the shutdown would be in place all of the year, this would be more than half of GDP.
All right, so forgive my my math skills, but it sounds to me like the Federal Council, having put aside 42 billion for the crisis just doesn't add up. Doesn't sound like it's enough.
I think it's not the time to look at the numbers of the measures, but more at the measures itself. And there, I think the measures taken are quite smart because they build up on existing instruments, short-time work, and liquidity injections via the banking system. So these instruments are in place, they're flexible, and they are running from tomorrow on. The 40 billions mentioned by the federal government, it's really hard to put a price tag on now on all of the crisis. And that's why we put a price tag on every month. And from now on, we just should go on with these instruments in place and see how much it will cost. The most important thing is that they're flexible. I think it makes no sense to fight about different big numbers now.
All right, so a big number like the 100 billion fund that was proposed by some prominent economists here in Switzerland, it's too big or too much or not the right number.
I said too big, too little. It's hard to say. I mean, I think you should calculate a number for every month of shutdown, as we did in our study.
Okay, so you've got wait a minute.
Now, how long the crisis will last? And there's another criticism with this huge fund proposed, because there you would need to install new institutions before it is operating. So we emphasize the flexibility of the measures as well. Okay,
because you were saying 30 billion a month. The Federal Council is saying 42 total for the crisis. So yeah, hence my suspicion that it in fact is not enough. But you find otherwise. All right.
We will find out. I mean, as I said, flexibility is the most important thing right now. Nobody knows how long it will last and how deep the crisis will be. And what we calculated is for different policy measures, how much it will cost per month. Mm-hmm. And now we have to see how everything will evolve. And so I think the most important thing is this flexibility and building up existing tools that we already have in place.
All right, so if we fast forward through this shutdown scenario situation, the current situation that we're in, and we look towards the end when hopefully this is all winding down, and you find that you're going to have a lot of pent-up demand, right? You'll have huge demand for people probably wanting to go out and live their lives again and spend money and consume, et cetera, with probably a short supply of goods, which, poses a huge inflationary pressures on the SNB. So my question to you is, how significant is that issue for Switzerland in the current shutdown scenario?
As you mentioned, it depends if we stay in the current shutdown scenario or if we move to a more comprehensive one. Because every
let's go comprehensive. Let's go. What's most realistic at the moment for you?
Okay, I think most realistic is that we stay in the current shutdown scenario, the one we are right now, and that we don't go into this Italian scenario.
Okay.
And I think that's good, because the more stringent the measures are, the lower is aggregate supply. And the more generous the government support is, the higher is aggregate demand after the crisis. And with this difference, there lies the inflationary pressure. So we should take care that we don't drop too much with aggregate supply, and that we don't boost aggregate demand too much up. I think so it's important that we keep these real budget constraints in our minds when designing policies to counter the effects of this coronavirus pandemic.
And what could the SNB do to manage this kind of pressure?
I think at the moment they should observe this. I think they do that. And they have actually the instruments in place. Right now, they run a monetary policy that is rather loose. But if inflationary pressure mounts up, they have the instruments in place to counter this.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for your insights, Jörg. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. Have a good night.
Now, while countries around the world pump money into their economies to help fight the effects of the virus shutdowns, the question is, How can we get the healthy back to work safely in order to inject much-needed fuel back into the economy? Earlier, I spoke to Lily Hua Feng. She's a professor at finance at INSEAD, who says antibody tests could be the answer.
The antibody test actually can help you find people who never show symptoms, but they have been infected by the virus, which means that they are now healthy and, in fact, newly immune. Now, if you let these people, these are the people who can be let back into the economy and help us start the economic engine again.
Can I ask you something
And
quickly?
This is a smart way.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
Lily, to interrupt you, but you talk about immunity. I mean, are we at a point where we can determine whether or not people are, in fact, immune? Do we know this
Yes,
yet?
if you run the antibody test and somebody has the antibody, it means that they have had this virus in their system and now they've recovered without them even knowing because they've never shown symptoms, right? I believe this virus has spread far beyond even the alarming numbers that we're seeing every day. There's many people who have been affected and they never showed symptoms, but this antibody test can tell you this person has been infected, and therefore they have developed antibody and at least short-term immunity to this disease.
Now, I think you said that this is a relatively simple test and relatively, as I understand it, inexpensive. Why aren't we doing more of this?
Well, I think that I think that there are a few people that are advocating this, and I think that we need to, maybe we're still in a firefighting mode, thinking about how to stem the health crisis. I think the next phase, we absolutely need to start thinking about how to defend the economy from collapsing. And as I said, I think the measure should be trying to get the economy back, trying to get businesses to open up, workers back into their work in the safest possible that we can. So how do you do that, without putting people in harm's way? The best is to put the healthy people who are at very low risk, and also even better, the immune population. Having these human capital locked up as the rest of the economy, it's a very inefficient. So I think that to the extent that these tests are relatively cheaper and easier to ramp up compared to the diagnostic tests, this is we definitely need to look for these options in order to help us in a smart way and a safe way to allow people gradually to go back to work and get the economy going again.
Now, these tests, of course, will be generating tremendous amounts of data, right? So
Yes.
in the end, we come back to the big data discussion and, can we sacrifice our privacy for this? I mean, and at what cost?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I think that the antibody test is, to the extent that you have people already going for the diagnostics test, this will be a similar type of thing. I think that the far worse type of privacy invasions will be using, say, mobile technology, GPS positioning systems to actually trace people and limit the movements. If we were talking about that, I think that that's much, much more severe than a screening. In fact, even just for the purpose of scientific study, I think that we do need to, in fact, the medical professionals and scientists need to actually do this test in order to figure out, this is the only way for us to figure out what was the true extent of the virus infection. Because right now we're having only a selected sample. The number of infections are far smaller than it is in reality. And the only way to find out would be doing this. So I think that, at the very least, even to just find out the extent of the infection, we will need to do this. And then if we're doing that, I think that this information can be used in terms of helping us get the economy back.
So what I'm hearing you say is that big data is another way to fight this economic crisis.
Absolutely. As we can see, the testing and tracing, that was absolutely critical for the first line defense in terms of containing the virus spread. And I think that it could, again, provide an answer in the second phase when we're thinking about how do we now safeguard the economy.
My feeling is that you are still hopeful. You cite in your paper there are still green shoots of hope. Are you going as far as agreeing with President Trump and saying that by Easter, people should be back to work?
Okay. So I do see green shoots of hope. I think that we need to be optimistic and we need to be positive. In Italy, which is the epicenter now, the numbers are improving. Clearly, I think that there's a trend now starting. It started to turn 2 weeks after the country went into lockdown. Germany's number seems to be improving. And just look at the example of China and Korea. At some point, they look just as despair as what we're seeing now in Italy and the US. So there will be a turning point. And generally speaking, it's about a couple of weeks in. So I think President Trump, the Easter comment, he could just be actually right around about the right time, but I would be a little bit afraid for the US just to go from 0 to 1 in terms of this opening up and letting people go back.
And Switzerland, Europe, how do you see things moving forward here?
Yes, I think that Switzerland, just like many other European countries, have very draconian limitation of movements, and citizens are generally speaking quite rule compliant. I do think that we are going to see the turning point on the virus per se relatively quickly. Based on the information data we had from China, from Korea, from also Italy, I think it's within 2 or 3 weeks, the increase of the new cases start to stop. And so therefore you can start thinking about, and we see that curve flattening. So I think that we are maybe a week away from that in Switzerland or in some of the other European countries. I think Italy, very hopefully, it's already there.
Coronavirus lockdowns have stoked demand for some gig workers like delivery drivers and supermarket assistants. For others, though, the crisis has meant the loss of employment with few, if any, social protections. While the Federal Council has announced new measures to help them, it's not clear who will benefit, says Yves Schnouli. He's managing director at Koopel, a gig jobs platform. Hannah Wise spoke to him earlier.
Let me say it like this. So we really appreciate the new measures that have been announced last Friday. Especially, it's a clear, from our point, a clear signal that the government is recognizing also the relevance and the size of the pool of the flexible and temporary workers here in Switzerland. In general, really much appreciated the announcement, but at the moment, I think it's really down to understanding how we can actually put this into action. But it's certainly great.
How much more help do you need then from the Federal Council?
I think at the moment it's really the help that is needed is to really understand on how the process looks like, and who out of the gig workers, out of the temporary workers, etc., is really entitled to it. Is it people that are currently on a gig, like on a contract? Is it people that have worked a specific number of hours already? It's these kind of questions that we need to solve, and at the moment, at least that's what we can see, that the authorities are working extremely hard to making this happen. So we appreciate the direction that it goes, and it's a very important step for us.
So what are your kind of top 3 tips then for an employer who's struggling to pay his or her employees, but at the same time needs to keep them on staff so that, once recovery does come, they're straight back into it?
Yeah. I mean, what we can see, or what the biggest issue is that the employers, or also the companies we work with, sometimes they're not 100% clear on their different kind of layers within their workforce. So it really means that you have to understand who is your core employees, what do you need as core staff in order to guarantee business continuity. Number 2 is the first flexible layer, whereas number 3 would be the hyperflex layer. This perspective is critical in order to now downsize or slow down the company in the right kind of way, and keep your legs agile enough to ramp up quickly after things get starting going back to normal.
And these hyper flexible staff members, I guess these are the people who the International Labour Organization were talking about last week on CNN Money Switzerland, when they warned that many gig workers are going to face unemployment. Is that right?
That's right in some respects, but at the other hand, I would also like to quickly discuss why there are gig workers in the first place. As as we can see, it's extremely important to understand that our economy really needs these flexible workers or these gig workers, particularly in a situation like we're experiencing right now. It's these people that are able to switch sectors within a day or two and support companies to stay in business when they experience a huge demand, or even a demand that they would have never ever anticipated, as we can see it with the supermarkets, with the healthcare system, but also, for example, with some of the logistics companies, etc. It clearly shows that gig workers or flexible workers are absolutely essential to our economy. And from our point of view, I think this really shows in a situation like that is really a huge opportunity to position this group of workers in a completely different light than we had it in the past. That's simply something to bear in mind, and from our point of view, obviously a very important aspect, particularly in a situation like this one.
Do you think that then, Eva, this is like a watershed moment for the gig economy, a real opportunity to address potentially some things that are missing to protect workers in the gig economy?
In my opinion, this situation has really exposed a hole in our legislation, and we are correcting it as we speak. So I'm absolutely in agreement that this can be a step change in the way we go forward, and again, position gig workers or this group of workers in a completely different way and enable opportunities for them, protection, etc. That was necessarily a long time before we had the corona situation.
So the measures that have been taken during the coronavirus, you want to last long after the coronavirus because these workers are essential to the economy.
Yes, and that's exactly what we're hoping for, and that's actually also what we would expect. So a situation like this one has exposed how essential these workers are for our economy. We're now changing regulations to make sure that they are being taken care of in a proper way, that they are protected in a way like you would have staff or regular staff that works on permanent contracts, etc. So it's a step in the right direction, and it must be a step that is here to last forever, because the part or the share of gig workers will not diminish. It will not decrease over time. It's actually a share or a style of work that is accelerating quite quickly.
All right, well, Yves Schnulli, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
More and more, we are seeing that concerns around COVID-19 vary among generations. Greta Rufino spoke to Stephen Taylor. He's the author of The Psychology of Pandemics and clinical psychologist at the University of British Columbia, about this generational gap, and asked him for tips on how to survive home office and quarantine.
We have research underway at the moment in which we're trying to get a gauge on how anxious people are. That research has just recently started, so we don't have the results yet. But my sense is that more and more people are becoming concerned about COVID-19. The older people do tend to be more concerned about the physical or health consequences of COVID-19, whereas talking to younger people, my sense is they're more concerned about the economic costs, particularly the ones who aren't able to work at home, such as people in the service industry, such as people working at bars or clubs, who are losing income because they're self-isolating.
What are the tips you can give to people to cope with this situation?
It's important to plan. Excuse me. It's important to plan. Plan your day, structure your day, have a routine. If you have children, plan a structure for things that they can do. Have a plan for what are you going to do when you get on each other's nerves, if you're in a small apartment and so forth. Discuss that ahead of time when you're both feeling calm, for example. It's important to reach out to other people. As I said, you might be self-isolating, but you don't have to be socially isolated. You can reach out to friends and family by texting, by social media, and that's important at this time. I think it's really important to remember that people are resilient. We've survived countless pandemics in the past, and humans as a species are still around. That we're adapting to the new normal. People are adapting to working in self-isolation, and it's difficult and stressful, but we're adapting to it. So I think we should remember that we're stronger than we think we are.
Do you think this is going to change the way we are going to work in the future?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure. For some people, this will change their lives forever, particularly the people who lose their businesses, who go bankrupt, will suffer serious financial difficulties. That's going to change them. This possibly could. It could change the way we work. But who knows? Only time will tell.
You can get involved in today's news by checking out our social media pages on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Reach out, whatever the comment. It's always great to hear from you. As always, don't forget everything is also available on our website, cnnmoney.ch. Please stay home, stay safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.